The Blood Forge arena sprawled across the northern hemisphere of Chthon Prime like a festering wound. From orbit, its vast network of training grounds, combat pits, and meditation chambers formed intricate patterns that resembled the neural pathways of some ancient violent mind. For 3,000 years, this planet-sized crucible had forged the galaxy's most feared warriors. Here, under the crimson light of twin suns, elite warlords trained not for years or decades, but for centuries. Their bodies and minds honed to perfection through arcane rituals that would break lesser beings. High Warlord Zorath stood at the apex of the grand observation tower, his scarred hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the newest batch of initiates struggling through their morning trials. Each scar on his weathered face told a story of victory, each line etched deep by battles won across 100 worlds. He had devoted 4 centuries to mastering the blood-forged traditions, rising from a nameless conscript to become the heir apparent of this legacy of controlled brutality. "They grow softer with each generation," muttered Lady Corvin, his most promising protégé. As she joined him at the viewing platform, her cybernetic eye whirred softly as it focused on a young warrior who had just collapsed during the gravity amplification exercise. "Perhaps," Zorath replied, his voice like grinding stone. "Or perhaps we have simply grown harder." He turned from the window, his massive frame casting long shadows in the harsh light. "The General Council has summoned us. There are whispers of unrest on the border worlds." Meanwhile, in a star system that the Chthonian Empire barely acknowledged on their maps, Earth's fledgling military academy on Luna Base buzzed with an entirely different kind of energy. Where the Blood Forge arena embodied millennia of tradition, Luna Base represented humanity's desperate scramble to catch up with galactic civilization. The academy had been operational for less than 5 years, carved hastily from lunar rock when humanity realized that academic excellence alone wouldn't protect them in an increasingly dangerous universe. Lieutenant Mara Rodriguez stood before a holographic display in the tactical simulation room, her dark eyes tracking the movements of her fellow first-year recruits as they attempted to coordinate a mock defense against a Zerathan raiding party. She winced as half the defensive line collapsed within seconds. "Reset," she called out, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. "Remember, the Zerathans use pheromone communication. You can't just jam their comms and expect them to fall apart." Cadet Rafiq Al-Nil raised his hand from his position at the engineering console. "What if we synthesized counter-pheromones? My biotech implants could analyze their chemical signatures in real time." Mara paused, considering. It was exactly the kind of unorthodox thinking that their instructors encouraged, but which the established galactic powers mocked as human improvisation. She remembered her grandfather's stories about Earth's old wars, how innovation born of desperation had often trumped superior firepower. "Run the simulation," she said. "Let's see if it works." The Academy's director, Admiral Sarah Thorne, watched from her office as the recruits ran through their exercises. Earth's entry into the galactic community had been turbulent, to say the least. Humanity had gone from believing they were alone in the universe to discovering they were considered barely sapient by civilizations that measured their histories in geological epochs. The Academy was their attempt to prove they belonged, but Thorne knew how the other species viewed them, clever apes playing at being soldiers. Her contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth's diplomatic corps. As she read the message, her expression grew increasingly grim. In the Chthonian Empire's seat of power, the General Council convened in their ancient chamber. These were beings who had overseen the Empire's military might for so long that their original species characteristics had been all but erased by cybernetic enhancements and life extension treatments. They sat like living statues, their thoughts transmitted through neural links that made verbal communication seem quaint. The border worlds grow restless. The first counselor's thoughts echoed through the link. They question our methods, our traditions. Some even speak of seeking alliance with the newer species. "Let them try," responded the second. What can children barely descended from their trees offer against the might of Chthon? There is one way to remind the galaxy of our supremacy, the third suggested, and a plan began to form in their collective consciousness. An open challenge, a demonstration that no amount of clever thinking can overcome centuries of perfection. The announcement, when it came, sent shockwaves through known space. The Chthonian Empire, in a gesture of supreme confidence, issued an open challenge to any who doubted their military supremacy. They would send their two greatest champions, High Warlord Zorath and Lady Corvin, to face any force that dared accept. The terms were simple. Victory would grant the challengers a seat on the Galactic Security Council. Defeat would mean accepting Chthonian military oversight for the next century. Most civilizations immediately recognized the trap. The Chthonians had never lost such a challenge in their recorded history. To accept was to invite humiliation at best, annihilation at worst. On Earth, the debate raged for days. President Martinez convened emergency sessions with military advisors, while public opinion split violently between those who saw acceptance as suicide and those who viewed declining as cowardice. "We're not ready," General Patterson argued during one heated session. "Our best soldiers have 5 years of training. Theirs have 500. If we decline," countered Secretary of Defense Williams, "we're essentially admitting we'll always be second-class citizens in the galactic community." The debate might have continued indefinitely, but public pressure mounted. Social media campaigns with slogans like "David beat Goliath" and "Freedom or Death" went viral. When polls showed 70% of Earth's population favored accepting the challenge, the government's hand was forced. Admiral Thorne received the orders with a heavy heart. She gathered the Academy's staff for an emergency meeting. "They've accepted the challenge," she announced without preamble. "Earth will send our forces against the Chthonian champions." "Which forces?" asked Commander Liu, the Academy's chief tactical instructor. Thorne's silence spoke volumes before she finally answered. "Our entire first-year cohort." The room erupted. Sending seasoned veterans would have been risky enough, but first-year recruits? It was madness. "There's method to it," Thorne continued, raising her voice over the objections. "The Council specified that we could send any force. They expect us to send our best, our most experienced. No one would expect us to send recruits." "Because it's insane," Liu protested. "Because it might be our only chance," Thorne corrected. "Our recruits don't fight like the rest of the galaxy expects. They haven't been indoctrinated into traditional combat doctrines. They think differently, adapt faster. If we are going to lose anyway, let's at least lose in a way no one expects." When the announcement reached the recruits, the reaction was mixed. Some cheered, seeing it as the opportunity of a lifetime. Others went pale, understanding the implications. Mara found herself somewhere in between, her mind already racing through tactical possibilities even as her stomach churned with dread. "We're going to die," muttered Cadet Harrison, slumping in his seat. "Probably," Rafik agreed cheerfully, his implants already glowing as he accessed everything known about Chthonian combat techniques. "But what a way to go." Mara stood, drawing the attention of her fellow recruits. "Listen up," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Yes, we're probably going to lose. Yes, we might die. But we're not going to make it easy for them. We're going to show the galaxy that Earth doesn't roll over, that we're not just clever apes trying to play soldier. We're going to fight smart, fight hard, and make them earn every victory." The room gradually filled with nods and straightening spines. If they were going to face legends, they'd do it standing tall. The next weeks transformed Luna Base into a hive of frantic activity. Traditional training was abandoned in favor of specialized preparation. Every scrap of intelligence on Chthonian combat methods was analyzed, every historical battle recording dissected. The recruits barely slept, pushing themselves through simulations that grew increasingly brutal. Mara emerged as a natural leader, her tactical brilliance evident as she designed guerrilla drills that leveraged Luna's unique environment. She had them training in the base's defunct mining tunnels, learning to use the moon's low gravity and lack of atmosphere to their advantage. The Chthonians train for conventional warfare, she explained during one strategy session. Stand-up fights, honorable combat. We're going to give them chaos. Rafiq's biotech innovations proved invaluable. His implants, originally designed for medical applications, were repurposed for combat adaptation. He developed protocols that would allow the recruits' equipment to sync biometrically, creating a fluid network of shared sensory data. It's not quite a hive mind, he explained to a fascinated group of engineers. But it'll give us reaction times that might surprise them. But not everything went smoothly. 3 nights before they were scheduled to depart for the challenge, alarms shrieked through the base. Rafiq, working late in the equipment bay, had detected anomalies in the training suit's firmware. "Someone's been in here," he announced to the gathered security team. These modifications would have caused catastrophic failures during combat. Overheating, oxygen supply interruption, the works. The implications were staggering. Someone wanted Earth to fail, and fail spectacularly. Suspicion ran rampant through the ranks. Was it an alien agent? A human traitor? The unity Mara had worked so hard to build began to fracture as recruits eyed each other with distrust. "We don't have time for this," Mara declared during an emergency assembly. "Whoever did this wants us divided, suspicious, weak. We're not going to give them that satisfaction. From now on, buddy system for everything. No one works alone. No one accesses equipment alone. We watch each other's backs, not because we don't trust, but because we do." The sabotage attempt, rather than weakening them, seemed to forge the recruits into a tighter unit. They had an enemy within to complement the enemy without, and it made them more determined than ever. The journey to the designated combat zone took them through the heart of Chthonian space. The recruits pressed against the viewports, watching massive dreadnoughts drift by like metal mountains. Every ship they passed could have vaporized their entire transport with a thought, a reminder of the empire they were challenging. Zorath and Corvin awaited them on Thessalon, a border world chosen for its varied terrain. As the Earth transport descended, Mara studied the landscape. Sprawling deserts gave way to crystalline forests, while electromagnetic storms crackled across mountain ranges. It was a warrior's playground, offering every possible combat environment. The opening ceremony was held in a natural amphitheater, with representatives from dozens of worlds in attendance. The contrast between the two forces was stark. Zorath and Corvin stood like statues carved from war itself, their powered armor humming with barely contained energy. Behind them, the weight of 3 millennia of military tradition seemed to press down on the arena. The Earth recruits, by contrast, looked almost childlike in their basic combat gear. But Mara had insisted on one detail. Each recruit wore a small patch showing Earth from space, a reminder of what they represented. The Chthonian Herald, a being so enhanced it no longer resembled any known species, read out the terms. The challenge shall consist of 5 trials, each testing different aspects of military excellence. Victory in 3 trials wins the challenge. The trials are single combat, tactical simulation, endurance hunt, tech warfare, and final confrontation. Furthermore, the Herald continued, its voice carrying across the assembled masses, to ensure the validity of this test, combat shall be live. Medical suspension fields will prevent permanent death, but pain, injury, and defeat will be real. A ripple ran through the Earth ranks. They had expected simulation combat, not live fire. This wasn't just a challenge anymore, it was barely short of a death match. The first trial began at dawn. Single combat. 1 champion from each side would face off in ritualized dueling. The Chthonians clearly expected Earth to send their best individual fighter. Instead, Mara selected Thompson, a recruit whose main skill was defensive combat and survival. "You don't have to win," she told him. "You just have to last. Make him work for it." The bout that followed defied every expectation, where Chthonian combat doctrine emphasized decisive strikes and overwhelming force. Thompson bobbed and weaved, using every trick in humanity's long history of asymmetric warfare. He threw sand, feigned injuries, and at one point even played dead, only to roll away when Corvin moved to claim victory. The crowd grew restless as the fight dragged on. This wasn't the glorious combat they expected. It was messy, undignified, and absolutely effective. Thompson lasted nearly an hour before Corvin finally cornered him, and even then, he managed to damage her armor's power coupling before accepting defeat. "Pathetic display," Corvin spat as medical drones carried Thompson away. But Mara caught the slight hesitation in her voice. They had expected to win in minutes, not an hour. The second trial, tactical simulation, played more to Earth's strengths. Both sides would command virtual armies in a complex battlefield scenario. Zorath took the field for Chthon, his centuries of experience evident in every decision. But Mara had studied his past battles obsessively. She knew his preferences, his habits formed over lifetimes of victory. Where he expected traditional deployment, she scattered her forces. Where he anticipated concentration of force, she dispersed. Her tactics were chaos incarnate, units appearing and disappearing, following no recognizable doctrine. "What is this madness?" Zorath muttered, watching his perfectly coordinated assault bog down against an enemy that refused to fight properly. The simulation ended in a draw, both armies too bloodied to claim victory. But for Earth, a draw against the legendary Zorath was as good as a win. The recruits celebrated quietly, aware they had just achieved the impossible. The third trial would prove their greatest test yet, the endurance hunt. Both forces would be dropped on opposite ends of a wilderness preserve, tasked with finding and eliminating the other while surviving the planet's hostile environment. It was designed to test everything: tactics, survival skills, unit cohesion, and sheer determination. As they prepared, Rafik made a disturbing discovery. His implants, scanning for threats, detected familiar code signatures in the preserve's environmental control systems. "The saboteur," he whispered to Mara. "They're here, and they've rigged the trial." There was no time to alert the officials. No way to prove the tampering without revealing their own intelligence capabilities. They would have to go in knowing the environment itself would be turned against them. The hunt began at twilight. Earth's recruits moved in small, coordinated teams, using Rafik's biotech network to maintain connection without conventional communications that could be tracked. They had barely covered 2 kilometers when the first malfunction hit, a localized weather system that shouldn't have existed, driving freezing rain directly into their path. "Adapt," Mara commanded through the biolink. "Use it." They pressed on, turning each orchestrated disaster into an opportunity. When predators were mysteriously driven into their path, they used the chaos to mask their movements. When toxic gas vented from what should have been stable ground, they used their emergency gear to create impromptu chemical weapons. But the true shock came when they finally engaged the Chthonian warriors. The first skirmish erupted in a crystal forest, the recruits' biometric drones adapting mid-battle to the warriors' combat patterns. Zorath, commanding from an elevated position, watched in disbelief as his perfectly executed flanking maneuver fell apart. "How?" he demanded, watching Earth recruits respond to attacks before they were even launched. The answer came from Rafik's innovation. The drones weren't just observing, they were predicting, using micro-expressions and energy signatures to anticipate moves. It was technology born not from military doctrine but from medical diagnosis, repurposed for survival. The hunt raged for 3 days. Earth's forces, despite every environmental hazard thrown at them, managed to eliminate Corvin's position through coordinated drone strikes. But Zorath proved why he was a legend, systematically hunting down Earth teams until only a handful remained. The final confrontation came at dawn on the fourth day. Mara's last squad, exhausted and battered, faced Zorath in the ruins of an ancient settlement. What followed wasn't a battle, but a conversation written in violence. Every move Zorath made spoke of centuries of perfection, of traditions honed to lethal precision. But Mara's responses told a different story, of desperation breeding innovation, of a species that had survived not through strength but through adaptation. In the end, both leaders stood among the ruins, weapons expended, armor compromised. The trial was declared a draw, another impossible result that had the Chthonian observers muttering among themselves. 2 trials to 1, with 2 draws. The fourth trial would likely decide everything. Tech warfare was supposed to be Chthon's guaranteed victory. Their cyber warfare specialists had been perfecting their craft since before humanity discovered fire. But Earth's recruits had grown up in the digital age, their minds shaped by information warfare from childhood. The battle took place in virtual space, each side trying to breach the other's defenses while protecting their own. The Chthonians attacked with elegant precision, their assault programs moving like digital poetry. Earth's defense was chaos, not the planned chaos of their earlier tactics, but genuine, creative mayhem. They're not following any recognized protocols, the Chthonian cyber specialist reported, confusion evident despite their electronic voice. It's as if they're making it up as they go, which was exactly what they were doing. Earth's recruits, led by a team of former hackers and gamers, treated the virtual battlefield like a massive multiplayer game. They broke rules because they didn't know they existed, found exploits through sheer experimentation, and turned the Chthonians' perfectionism against them. The match ended when Cadet Park, a quiet recruit who'd spent more time playing strategy games than studying military history, discovered a logic loop in the Chthonian defense grid. It was the kind of vulnerability that traditional military thinking would never have looked for. But to someone raised on finding game exploits, it was obvious. Earth had won a trial. The impossible had become possible. But as the recruits celebrated, darker currents moved beneath the surface. The General Council convened an emergency session, their neural link crackling with barely contained fury. "This is unacceptable," the first counselor transmitted. "These primitives make a mockery of our traditions." "Then we ensure they cannot continue to do so," the second replied. "The final trial allows for flexibility in interpretation." "You suggest we violate the sacred rules of challenge?" "I suggest we ensure the proper outcome. The integrity of the Empire is at stake." Orders went out through hidden channels. The final trial would proceed as planned, but certain safeguards would malfunction. Medical suspension fields would fail at crucial moments. Environmental hazards would exceed normal parameters. It would be unfortunate, but accidents happened in live combat. Zorath received these orders in his private chambers and felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: doubt. He had built his life on the foundation of honorable combat, of victory through superior skill and dedication. What honor was there in rigged contests? He found Corvin in the training hall, running through combat forms with mechanical precision. "You've heard the Council's orders?" he asked. She nodded, never breaking rhythm. "We serve the Empire." "We serve honor," Zorath corrected. "Or we did. Tell me, what honor is there in slaughtering children because they dare to think differently?" Corvin finally stopped, turning to face her mentor. "You're questioning the Council?" "I'm questioning everything," Zorath admitted. "These humans, they're not what we expected. They adapt, they innovate, they survive. Isn't that what war is truly about? Not perfect forms and ancient traditions, but survival?" "Careful, old friend. Such thoughts border on heresy. Perhaps heresy is what we need." The night before the final trial, Mara couldn't sleep. She walked the perimeter of their compound, checking on sentries, reviewing plans, trying to quiet the storm in her mind. They had come so far, achieved more than anyone thought possible. Tomorrow would decide if it had all been worth it. She found Rafik in the medical tent, working on something with intense focus. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, his implants dim with exhaustion. "I've been analyzing the data from our trials. There's something wrong. Mara, the environmental controls. The system malfunctions. They're not random. Someone's been orchestrating them. The saboteur? Bigger than that. This goes all the way up. I think..." He paused, then pushed forward. "I think the Chthonian Council itself is rigging this challenge." The implications were staggering. If true, it meant tomorrow's trial would be more than just difficult. It would be designed to kill them. "What do we do?" Rafik asked. Mara was quiet for a long moment. "We fight anyway. But we fight smart. Spread the word quietly. Everyone goes in expecting betrayal. And Rafik, whatever you're working on, finish it. We're going to need every edge we can get." The final trial was announced with all the pomp the Chthonians could muster. The venue was the Bloodforge Colosseum itself, transported piece by piece to this world for the occasion. It was a volcanic arena, heat vents and lava flows creating a hellscape that had hosted executions and gladiatorial contests for millennia. The herald's voice boomed across the assembled crowds. "For the final trial, combat will be unrestrained. All weapons, all tactics permitted. Victory comes only when one side yields or can no longer continue. May the strongest prevail." As the Earth recruits entered the arena, their equipment sensors immediately began screaming warnings. The temperature was far higher than specifications indicated, the toxic gases more concentrated. Rafik's suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was an execution. "Stay calm," Mara commanded through the biolink. "Remember the contingencies. We knew this might happen." The battle began with Zorath and Corvin moving in perfect synchronization, their centuries of partnership evident in every step. They expected Earth's forces to scatter, to panic in the face of overwhelming odds. Instead, the recruits fell into formations they had never practiced, but somehow knew. Rafik's biotech network allowing them to move as extensions of each other's will. When Corvin's plasma lance carved through their front line, they flowed around it like water. When Zorath's gravity hammer shattered the ground, they used the debris as cover. But the rigged environment took its toll. Medical suspension fields flickered and failed just as injuries occurred. Temperature regulators in suits malfunctioned at critical moments. One by one. Recruits fell, their screams real now, their pain no longer simulated. Mara watched her people suffer and felt something cold crystallize in her chest. This wasn't war. It was murder dressed up as tradition. "New plan," she announced. "We're not playing their game anymore." What followed was tactical genius born of desperation. Instead of fighting the Chthonian warriors, Earth's forces began fighting the arena itself. They targeted environmental controls, turned the rigged systems against their creators. When a lava flow was diverted toward their position, they redirected it into the Chthonian advance. But the turning point came from an unexpected source. As Zorath moved to deliver a killing blow to a fallen recruit, he hesitated. The boy beneath his blade couldn't have been more than 19 standard years, barely adult by human standards. He thought of his own initiation, centuries ago, when honor meant something more than blind obedience. "Get up," he commanded, stepping back. "Defend yourself properly." Corvin watched in shock as her mentor began pulling his strikes, fighting to disable rather than kill. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done long ago," Zorath replied. "Fighting with honor." The arena descended into chaos. Some Chthonian forces, confused by their champion's actions, held back. Others, following hidden orders, pressed their assault. Earth's recruits, recognizing the shift, adapted instantly. And then Mara did something that no Chthonian warrior would have considered. She saved her enemy's life. A rigged explosion, meant to eliminate clustered Earth forces, went off prematurely. Corvin, caught at the edge of the blast, found herself sliding toward an active lava flow. Her armor, damaged from the constant fighting, couldn't compensate. Mara didn't think. She dove forward, grabbing Corvin's hand just as the warrior went over the edge. For a moment, they hung there, predator and prey, enemy and enemy. Why? Corvin gasped. Because, Mara grunted, straining to pull her up. This is what strength looks like. Rafik and 2 other recruits rushed to help, hauling Corvin to safety. The arena fell silent, all combat ceasing as warriors on both sides processed what they had just witnessed. Zorath removed his helmet, his scarred face visible to all. I call upon the ancient right of judgment. This trial has been corrupted, its honor stained. The council has betrayed the very foundations of our warrior code. High above, hidden observers from the General Council scrambled to respond. This wasn't in their plans. Zorath was supposed to be their ultimate weapon, not their greatest critic. The trial continues, the herald announced. All combatants will. The herald never finished. A massive explosion rocked the arena as the council's hidden enforcers, elite units answering only to them, repelled from concealed positions. Their orders were simple: eliminate all witnesses, frame it as a tragic accident. But they had underestimated the power of unity forged in battle. Chthonian warriors and Earth recruits, enemies moments before, turned as one to face this new threat. Zorath and Mara stood side by side, their different fighting styles complementing perfectly. Corvin fought alongside Rafik, her traditional combat forms enhanced by his adaptive technology. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment the old galaxy died and a new one was born. It wasn't about species or tradition anymore. It was about those who fought with honor against those who had forgotten what the word meant. When the dust settled, the council's enforcers lay defeated. The arena, built to showcase dominance, had instead become a monument to change. Overhead, dozens of worlds' representatives had witnessed everything, their recordings already spreading across the Galactic network. In the days that followed, the Chthonian Empire underwent its greatest upheaval in 3 millennia. The General Council, exposed as corrupt manipulators, found their support evaporating. Zorath and Corvin led a reformation movement, declaring that strength without honor was just brutality. Earth's recruits returned home as heroes, but the victory felt hollow. They had lost friends, seen too much death, learned that the galaxy could be even crueler than they'd imagined. But they had also learned something else, that courage and innovation could stand against any tradition, no matter how ancient. Mara stood before the next class of recruits at Luna Base, her uniform now bearing the insignia of a full lieutenant. The eager faces before her reminded her of her own class, just months ago, before they knew what awaited them among the stars. "I'm not going to lie to you," she began, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. "The galaxy is dangerous. There are powers out there that have forgotten what it means to be honorable, what it means to grow and change. They'll test you in ways you can't imagine." She paused, looking at each recruit in turn. "But here's what I learned in the Bloodforge arena. True strength isn't forged in endless bloodshed. It's not about perfect forms or ancient traditions. True strength comes from adapting, from thinking differently, from having the courage to change not just yourself but the galaxy around you. We're not the strongest species out there. We're not the oldest or the most advanced, but we are the most adaptable. We survive because we change, because we see possibilities where others see only tradition. That's our strength. That's what will keep us alive out there." The recruits straightened, inspiration replacing fear in their eyes. They would face their own challenges, their own trials, but they would face them as humans, messy, chaotic, brilliantly adaptive humans. Meanwhile, on Chthon Prime, Zorath stood in the same observation tower where this story began. But now, instead of watching initiates struggle through brutal traditions, he watched them learning new ways. Combat training now included ethics courses. Strategy sessions incorporated innovation workshops. The Bloodforge arena was still a crucible, but it now forged warriors who thought as well as fought. "You think they're ready?" Corvin asked, joining him as she had months before. "They're learning," Zorath replied. "Just as we are. The humans taught us that perfection is stagnation. Growth comes from challenge, from being willing to abandon what no longer serves. The Council's remaining loyalists won't accept this easily." "No," Zorath agreed. "But perhaps that too is a lesson from our young friends. Sometimes the old ways must be challenged, especially when it seems impossible." The galaxy had changed. The Interstellar Coalition now included Earth as a full member, their unconventional approaches already influencing military doctrine across a dozen worlds. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization for millennia were beginning to crack, allowing new ideas to flourish. But questions remained. Would this new coalition maintain its ideals of innovation balanced with ethics? Or would the cycle of power and corruption begin anew? With different faces but the same fundamental flaws? In a quiet moment, Rafik found himself working on a new project. His biotech innovations from the challenge had attracted attention from medical organizations across the galaxy. Technology designed for war was being repurposed for healing, turning instruments of destruction into tools of restoration. "From swords to plowshares," he murmured, an ancient Earth phrase that suddenly seemed prophetic. The border worlds that had sparked the initial unrest now found themselves with choices they'd never had before. Without the Chthonian Empire's iron grip, they could forge their own paths. Some chose to maintain traditional ways. Others embraced radical change. The galaxy was becoming more diverse, more chaotic, more alive. But with freedom came responsibility. Piracy increased in the power vacuum. Old feuds, long suppressed by imperial might, flared into open conflict. The new coalition faced its first real tests not on the battlefield but in council chambers, trying to balance freedom with security, innovation with stability. Mara, now serving as Earth's military liaison to the coalition, often found herself mediating between species with radically different approaches to these challenges. The Zerathans wanted strict regulation. The Prydici advocated complete autonomy, while the reformed Chthonians struggled to find their place in a galaxy that no longer feared them. "How do you do it?" a young diplomat asked her after a particularly contentious session. "How do you get them to work together?" Mara smiled, remembering a volcanic arena where enemies became allies. "You remind them that we're stronger together than apart, that our differences aren't weaknesses, they're advantages. And sometimes," she added with a wry grin, "you just have to be stubborn enough to outlast their arguing." The anniversary of the challenge arrived with little fanfare. Those who had been there gathered quietly, humans and Chthonians together, to remember the fallen and celebrate the living. They shared stories, compared scars, and marveled at how much had changed. Zorath raised a glass, a human custom he'd adopted, to the assembled veterans. "To the future," he said simply. "May it always surprise us." "To the future," they echoed, a dozen species speaking as one. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who moved among them. But for those beings, everything had changed. The galaxy was no longer divided between the ancient and established versus the young and struggling. It was becoming something new, something unpredictable. Whether that would lead to a golden age or new forms of conflict remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the old ways of thinking, the rigid adherence to tradition at the expense of growth, had been shattered. In its place grew something fragile but promising, a galaxy where merit mattered more than age, where innovation was valued alongside wisdom, where the strength to change was recognized as the greatest strength of all. As Mara looked out at the stars from Lunar Base, she thought about the scared first-year recruit she had been, thrust into an impossible situation. That girl was gone, replaced by someone harder but also wiser. Someone who understood that true victory sometimes meant changing the very nature of the game. The next morning brought new challenges, new crises that demanded attention, border disputes to mediate, training programs to establish, bridges to build between species that had been enemies for millennia. It was messy, complicated work, lacking the clear objectives of combat. But it was also hope. Hope that the galaxy could be better, that strength didn't have to mean oppression, that honor could coexist with innovation. It was a hope worth fighting for, worth the bloodshed in the Bloodforge arena. Rafiq's medical innovations had spread across 3 sectors, saving lives with technology born from combat necessity. Former enemies worked together on colony ships, their different strengths combining to tackle challenges neither could face alone. The rigid caste systems that had defined some civilizations for eons began to show cracks as beings questioned why tradition should override potential. Not everyone embraced these changes. Conservative factions on many worlds pushed back, viewing the human influence as corruption rather than evolution. Terrorist attacks targeted coalition facilities. Propaganda painted Earth's victory as a fluke, their methods as cowardice rather than cleverness. But for every voice raised in anger, 2 rose in curiosity. Young beings across the galaxy began to question their elders, to ask why things had always been done certain ways. Military academies started incorporating unconventional thinking into their curricula. The phrase human solution entered multiple languages, meaning an unexpected approach to seemingly impossible problems. Zorath, now heading the reformed Chthonian Military Council, often corresponded with Mara about these changes. Their messages, once they would have been battle plans, now discussed education reforms and cultural exchange programs. "We are planting seeds," he wrote in one message, "whose fruit we may never see, but our successors will feast or starve based on what we plant today." The second anniversary of the challenge saw the opening of the first integrated military academy, where young beings from all coalition worlds would train together. The site chosen was symbolic, the very arena where the final trial had taken place. Rebuilt not as a coliseum of death, but as a center of learning. Mara gave the opening address, looking out at eager faces from a dozen worlds. 2 years ago, this place hosted what was meant to be an execution. Instead, it became a birthplace, not just of military victory, but of something far more important, proof that we are stronger in our diversity than in our divisions. You will train together, learn together, possibly fail together. But in doing so, you'll discover what we learned in Fire and Blood, that the greatest strength isn't in perfect tradition or wild innovation alone, but in the wisdom to know when each is needed. The galaxy is vast, full of wonders and terrors we haven't even imagined. But whatever comes, we'll face it not as humans or Chthonians or any single species, but as citizens of a galaxy that values growth over stagnation, honor over blind obedience, and the courage to change over the comfort of tradition. The applause that followed came from 100 different forms of hands, tentacles, and appendages, but the sentiment was universal. The old galaxy, divided and rigid, was giving way to something new. That night, as celebrations continued across the compound, Mara found herself once again unable to sleep. But this time, it wasn't from worry, but from possibility. She thought of her grandfather's stories of Earth's wars, how humanity had slowly, painfully learned that cooperation was stronger than conflict. Now they were helping the galaxy learn the same lesson. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, betrayals, Moments when the old ways seemed simpler, safer. But there was no going back. The seal had been broken. The door opened. Rafik found her on the observation deck, his implants glowing softly in the darkness. "Credit for your thoughts? Just wondering what my grandfather would think of all this?" Mara replied. "He used to say that humans were too stubborn to know when we were beaten, that we'd try anything, no matter how crazy, if we thought it might work." Sounds like he was right. Maybe. Or maybe that's just what the galaxy needed. Someone too stubborn to accept that things had to stay the way they'd always been. They stood in comfortable silence, watching ships from different worlds dock at the Academy's ports. Each vessel represented a species taking a chance on change, on the possibility that the future could be different from the past. "You know what the really funny thing is?" Rafik said eventually. "The Chthonians spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of war. But in the end, it was a bunch of first-year recruits who taught them the most important lesson, which was that perfection is the enemy of growth, that sometimes you have to be willing to look foolish, to fail, to try something completely insane, if you want to move forward." Mara smiled. "I think they taught us something too." "Oh?" "That honor isn't about age or tradition, it's about choices. Zorath chose to question orders he knew were wrong. Corvin chose to change rather than remain rigid. They had every reason to stick with the old ways, but they chose growth instead. And now the whole galaxy gets to choose," Rafik mused. "Terrifying, isn't it?" "Terrifying," Mara agreed, "but also exhilarating." As dawn broke over the Academy, painting the alien sky in shades no human had names for, the future stretched out before them, uncertain, dangerous, but full of potential. The age of rigid tradition had ended. The age of adaptive growth had begun. Whether it would lead to paradise or chaos, none could say. But for those who had stood in the Bloodforge arena, who had seen enemies become allies and tradition give way to innovation, one thing was certain: whatever came next, they would face it together, with the strength that came from diversity and the wisdom that grew from challenge. The galaxy would never be the same. And for Mara, Rafik, Zorath, Corvin, and all who had been part of that impossible victory, that was exactly the point. True strength wasn't forged in endless bloodshed or perfect tradition. It was forged in the courage to change, to grow, to become more than what you were. The stars continued their dance, but now they danced to a different rhythm, one of possibility rather than certainty, of growth rather than stagnation. And in that dance lay the hope of all sapient beings, that tomorrow could be better than yesterday, if only they had the strength to change.